You're listening to The Rule of Law, the educational podcast sponsored by All Rise, where we focus on the intersection of law, technology, and storytelling. And now, here's your host, Lauren Round.
Welcome to Rule of Law. Joining us today is Andrew Cooper, a cannabis and psychedelics attorney and partner at Falcon, Rappaport and Berkman. We explore how Andrew made the leap into this niche practice area, what it's like building a career around an emerging industry, and where he sees cannabis policy and regulation headed next. Andrew, welcome to the podcast. Where are you recording from?
Hi, Lauren. I'm actually in my house on Long Island at the moment.
Okay, well, welcome. We're excited to have you. I want to jump into a bunch of exciting topics that we have, but we always start the show with an icebreaker. So your question is, what hill would you die on that has nothing to do with work?
What hill I would die on? That's a great question. And I think the answer is way more complicated than I'm prepared to answer.
Okay.
I guess I would die on the hill of standing up for people who don't have a voice. That means people who are oppressed, and it means animals. It can mean anything. I feel like if somebody, if those who do have a voice aren't willing to take a stand, we lose so much of who we are supposed to be. So that's all I could think of at the moment. But I probably would come back to the same answer no matter how much time you give me.
Yeah. No, that's a good answer. And I hope most people would die on that hill too, but probably not everyone. So no, that's a good answer. Well, I want to get to some substance, but could you just start us off with telling us first a little bit about you and your background and just give us a brief intro before we dive in?
Yeah, sure. I've got a lot of room to talk about. I've been doing this for 37 years. So I actually started out, I did the path of law review, federal clerkship, big firm, found that, it's not everything it was cracked up to be as far as I was concerned. Started working for a big firm in what they call their health law department. I will not name the firm. It turned out that health law department was actually tobacco litigation defense. We've come a long way. So now we actually have a practice area called healthcare, and it is actually practicing healthcare, not defending tobacco companies in suits brought by smokers who develop lung cancer. After that, I was fundamentally a trial lawyer, working in mainly complex commercial litigation, intellectual property, focusing on trademark and copyright matters, and I developed a practice specialty in healthcare. So I represented not only doctors who were buying, selling practices or doing joint ventures with hospitals, but also representing them in disciplinary proceedings, either brought by Office of Professional Medical Conduct or OPD. I did that for a long time. I think about 30 years, and then came the pandemic. So I had a lot of time to work in that area, and that was my focus. Also, the transactional components that come out of it. So in the IP area on trademark work, you end up doing a lot of licensing type deals, licensing the product, concept, or idea. In the healthcare world, same thing. On the litigation side, it's clear, but then the transactional side are doing transactions involving buys and sells of practices, building relationships among doctors and doctor groups and hospitals and things like that.
Very cool. So let's fast forward to today. You kind of alluded to then along came COVID as kind of maybe like a delineation point where you transitioned to what you're doing now. So fast forward, tell us a little bit about what you do today and maybe talk a bit about kind of why you transitioned and why you're not doing what you used to do in big law anymore.
Yeah. Well, not to say it out loud, but, I found in my career and my life that fundamentally, a lot of lawyers become disenchanted and disillusioned about the practice. And they secretly think about exits. How do I do something else with the skill set that I've built? I know that everybody thinks about that. It's hard to imagine that any lawyer hasn't. So, I think that, for a certain period of time, it's an enjoyable profession as long as you learn how to control your destiny. Don't let it control you. I talk to students all the time when I teach about, them saying, I'm going to take this job. I know it's a lot of hours, but I'm only going to do it for a little while. And then ultimately a little while becomes, in my case, 30 years. So I think it's important to stay focused and accept the fact that you're not obligated to be a lawyer. That is in the traditional sense. Lawyers, as I like to say, do everything better than most. Now, we're not talking about specialized areas of anything, but generally speaking, we've experienced a lot. We're learning, we trained, and we can do a lot of different things. So one thing I say is don't feel obligated to be a lawyer in the traditional sense. And especially as we've evolved as a culture and in the time we live in, we can almost dictate our own job, our own occupation. We can create an opportunity. We don't have to work in a defined role anymore. So for me, the path was 20 years wanting to be a superhero. I loved every minute of what I did, despite the fact that I left a lot of things on the table and I gave up a lot of opportunities. I didn't spend as much time with my family. I didn't go on every vacation. If I did, it was back and forth, meeting them, wherever they were. While I went to events like their school plays or sporting events, I ended up going back to the office. So something always has to give. So for me, it was 20 years of wanting to do everything and loving it. And then I found gradually over the next 10, starting to dislike what I did. I felt like it controlled me. We're beholden to a lot of masters. Unlike most professions, we have to be responsive to not only clients and partners and other lawyers and adversaries, but judges and stuff like that. That it's a lot of work. So trying to figure out a way out for I want to say 10 years, but that's an arbitrary figure. It just seems like my latest recollection of what I did was I wasn't truly happy. So, COVID came and it was horrible for so many people and we lost so many people, and the events are not going to go down in history as being anything good. But I like to believe that from all bad, some good shall come. So for me, it was an opportunity to revisit what I did and how I did it and try to figure out a plan for moving forward, not wanting to continue the path that I had been in and feeling like this was a unique opportunity to change my trajectory. Now, I had been working in cannabis prior, mainly on the litigation side, but have never really given it much thought. I worked with my son, who was an architecture major, but he was a paralegal for me because he actually didn't want to practice architecture. And we worked together. So when this came to be and I ended up with long COVID and having brain fog and memory loss, we kind of talked about it, and he suggested that we move into the cannabis space because at least by that time it appeared imminent that the legislation that legalized cannabis was going to in fact pass. And the reason that happened probably was because the governor at the time, Andrew Cuomo, ran into a variety of issues through COVID. And, as a result, whether it's in an effort to deflect or not, he passed the legislation called the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. And that legalized adult use recreational cannabis. We already had medicinal in the space since 2017 or 18, but now we're talking about an adult use program. So for me, the opportunity to be involved in an emerging space, an emerging market, I don't know that I could point to another opportunity in my life that I had that. When have we ever seen a market emerge before our eyes? So it was kind of an easy choice. Find a firm that I could bring my practice to, merge my practice into, and build a cannabis practice. That's what I did. I found a firm that I loved. We worked together to come up with a strategy. And I focused on doing what I thought needed to be done in order to be in a position to work in that space. But not only work in this space, this was an opportunity to actually be impactful in how the market emerged. When you work in a rule-based system where they promulgate rules, you have an opportunity to comment on those draft rules. And when you comment on them, you have an opportunity to make changes or request that the regulators make changes that you think are necessary or appropriate for them to accomplish their ultimate goal. And while regulators can be more or less accommodating, they generally have to listen and they have to respond. So not only was I looking at cannabis as an opportunity to work in an area that was just emerged before my eyes, but it was working in an area where I had an opportunity to have an impact in how the regulations were built and ultimately how the market emerged in a socially responsible and fiscally robust fashion is how I like to phrase it. So I did. And I actually never looked back. It's been, I tell people all the time that if I didn't find cannabis, and That can be interpreted a lot of ways. But if I didn't find cannabis, I might have moved to the Bahamas, sold fruit for a living, and surfed all day because I was at that point. And I know that some or many of your listeners can relate to that.
What were the mechanics of making that transition? Because, COVID happened, the cannabis industry kind of seemed like it was actually going to take off or move in the right direction in New York. And then you said you found a firm that was kind of looking for that specialty. But I mean, prior to that, it didn't sound like you were actively practicing in that area, or maybe didn't have on your resume that, cannabis, you weren't a practicing cannabis attorney. So walk us through the mechanics of exactly how you said, I want to leave, I'm interested in this new and emerging role, and I need to find a firm that will believe in me and work with this. Like how did you make that happen?
Yeah, it happened really quickly. In fact, my initial conversations with the firm Falcon Rappaport and Berkman were not related to cannabis. It was just a discussion about coming in and building a litigation practice and basically taking over in that area. Then COVID happened, so these conversations started before. But through COVID, I just so many things were happening, and I was working. I had founded a telemedicine company. I was brought back in as a strategic advisor because, as people probably know, telemedicine moved light years ahead during the pandemic. In fact, if it wasn't for that concept or conceptually, we probably would have lost a lot more people. It gave us an opportunity to actually provide people with the support they needed, information mainly, and access to information in a way that helped save lives. So I was doing that at the same time, trying to figure out next steps. Nobody knew what was coming. We didn't know what to do. We'd never been confronted with anything like that kind of thing, a pandemic. And there was clearly no book or treatise that we could follow and read and understand what we were supposed to do in order to get through it. So I think a lot of people were just kind of shooting from the hip. And for me, it was just, I think I was fortunate, as I needed to make a change. This market emerged, and I felt that my skill set, my existing skill set, was uniquely positioned me to move to cannabis. Being that I was a healthcare lawyer, I was familiar and comfortable working through complex regulatory schemes, and at the same time, had worked with brands and helping brands identify target markets and demographics, figure out ways to bring products to market. So the combination of the healthcare and intellectual property background, I think, put me in a really good spot, a really good position to move into cannabis. But then it was really a function of timing. I was able to basically say, okay, you know what? I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to bring my practice into a firm, and I'm going to build something from the ground up. There was once again, no roadmap, no outline. Now, there was somewhere to draw from. Other states had legalized adult use before us. Other states had legalized medicinal. We had medicinal here. So it wasn't as if there was nobody who understood what it took to, one, help the regulations emerge, but also work in that space. Fundamentally, it's really regulatory heavy. So one, to be a cannabis lawyer, you have to understand the regulations. And beyond that, it's really just a function of the other practice areas working through the cannabis nuances, whether it's transactional, understanding how to get transactions done in a compliant way. In the real estate area, the same thing, negotiating leases that accommodate a cannabis use, intellectual property where we can't trademark federally anything cannabis. There's no category classification to do so. So we have to use creative ways to protect brands and marks. So basically, and then litigation. And ultimately, in every regulatory program, as it emerges, at some point, you will see the emergence of significant litigation. And that's kind of where we are right now in New York and New Jersey. So it's really just a function of, for me, it was just being willing to make that commitment. Because at the time, we didn't have a market. We didn't have regulations. We didn't open up the program, so to speak. We didn't have an application process. We didn't have anything. In fact, we didn't even have, we were still figuring out how to bring the medical operators into the adult use space. So we spent a lot of time in the beginning just really familiarizing ourselves with what the regulations were going to look like. We had draft rules that were prepared, and also building relationships. I mean, the one thing I learned from my past was that you want to make sure you have the people and the talent around you, because you know that to be successful on whatever vertical, and we can talk about what that means, vertical, you need to make sure that your clients have the support they need. And building the relationships and making connections, I always felt when people were connected to you, they were at a greater level of commitment. That is to your success or your client's success. So that's what some of us did. I don't know that everybody did. Some people simply put it on their website, claimed to be cannabis attorneys, and just sat back and did nothing. I mean, perception does become reality. So on some level, they're probably working in this space now, but they never had to do any of the heavy lifting. And I thought part of the fun for me, part of the gratification for me was the opportunity to actually do the heavy lifting.
I want to pull on a lot of those threads that you just mentioned with respect to the industry, but I can't move on from kind of talking about you and your background without finishing the loop on kind of what you were talking about before with being unhappy in what you were doing as at your previous firm and then moving into a new role. And part of that, it sounded like, was kind of the workload, not seeing your kids enough or not being present enough. And it sounds like you sort of found that in your new practice, but how were you able to make that work? Because moving into a new practice, building it from the ground up, and navigating an area of law that's developing in real time does not sound like it lends itself to a good amount of work-life balance or a more normal work schedule. So how are you able to make that work transitioning and achieving kind of the lifestyle that you wanted?
Yeah, no, it doesn't. I feel like, and pretty safe to say, I'm working more than I ever worked. The difference is I kind of feel like it's a hobby. Not because I work little, I touch it a little bit, but because I'm enjoying it so much that it really doesn't always feel like work. Although I will say that at the end of the day, being a lawyer, you're still a lawyer. And I like to say that lawyers are the best way for me to explain sometimes the downside of being a lawyer is lawyers, in my mind, almost operate as the blue collar worker of the white collar world. And some lawyers say, it doesn't make any sense. And then later on, they come back and it's exactly what we are. And as far as, the work, I think, we seem to think that working a lot or as much as possible is a badge of honor. When I call other people and I happen to speak to them and it's late on a Friday and they tell me they're still working, I say, I'm sorry. Not because I didn't do it, but because now I can recognize that we say that to validate ourselves and our self-worth. We don't say that for any other purpose. So the most important thing you can do as a lawyer is to be committed to control your day and your destiny. So it's not about how much we work. It's about how we work and how we feel about what we're doing. It's not really just about the amount of time we spend working, but it's about your perception of work. You still want to shut down. You don't want to be picking up calls when you're with your family on vacation or dinner. You want to make sure that you make it clear the chain of command, so to speak. Clients text me, and if I can talk, I will. And if I can, I'll let you know and I'll text you back. If you call me without first texting, I probably won't pick up. Not because I don't want to. I'll just text you back. I'm busy. I'm sorry. Is there a better time for us to talk? But sometimes I think that, until you get to a certain point in your life, you're not comfortable telling clients that because we're taught, well, you have to accommodate the client. The client's always right. I mean, that's a quote. That's not something I made up. So one, no, you have to manage clients' expectations. And number two, you have to decide what it is you want. Yes, if you go to a firm that tells you they expect 24, 25, 2,600 hours a year, you know exactly what that means. And when you say you'll only do it for a little while, I get a stomach ache because I said that too. The fact is we work a lot, but what I want to stress, the one thing that drives me crazy, and I only say that because I did it, was how much you work. I'm still working. I worked crazy. I didn't go here. I wasn't able to go there because I was working. So that's something we have to do a better job at, but that's a societal norm that, working a lot is a badge of honor. We look down on people who figured out a way to work 10, 12 hours a week and survive or thrive. We judge them. Well, why? Maybe that's a choice they make. I want to be comfortable, but I don't want to work. I don't want that to control me. I want to work to live and not live to work. So, but it's hard. I mean, I say that upon reflection, but I've been doing this 37 years. So I don't know that. I mean, I couldn't have said it 10 years ago, definitely not 20, and surely not 30. But I want to say it here because it's really important. And, I mean, at the end of the day, nothing's promised, nothing's guaranteed. So you have to figure out a way to enjoy what you do every day, not enjoy what you do for a future date that always seems to get pushed back.
It's funny that you said that because I was at about figuring it out. I was at a small conference recently and it was an all-day conference and I brought my laptop because, well, obviously I can't be away from my laptop for the entire day. And everyone else at the conference never had a laptop out. And I just thought, what are these people? How are these people not working all day? I must be more busy than them. I must have more work than them. And then at the end of the day, I thought I'm actually the silly one because they have figured out how to delegate or shift their work around or have a life where not every single day is dictated by these task lists that have to get done today. So I've tried to reframe that mindset too, that figuring it out doesn't mean that 60 hours of work every single week that you hate.
Well, and the other thing is, when you don't give yourself an opportunity to have a conversation and truly listen, because when you're distracted, you're not listening. I mean, I still make the mistake of being on a call where I'm not the most important person. My information or my position doesn't require me to be attentive the whole time, but it surely benefits me to be that person, to be attentive. So I've tried to make a conscious effort to not do that when I'm on calls, because you never know, like I talked about, where that's going to go and what it's going to lead you to. But if you're distracted, you're not going to hear it. And if you're not going to hear it, you're going to lose opportunities. So one of the other things about cannabis is that I found that I am far more able and willing and desirous of having conversations where I can truly listen to the other person and process what they say in a way where I can figure out, well, maybe I can help them. Maybe I have connections that will benefit them. Because the truth of the matter is we have on LinkedIn thousands of connections, right? But how many of them do you really use? So why not tap into those resources to help other people? Find the person, find the thing, find the product, concept, idea, service that they're looking for, simply because you happen to know or have built a relationship with a person that can do that. And be willing to support them. It doesn't cost you anything, but we're also, as lawyers, taught we have to monetize everything. You can't give away anything. So I have to try to figure out how to make money connecting this person to that person. And I think that not only do you lose the opportunity to build relationships, but to be honest with you, I think you lose opportunities. I think when you're so focused on the monetizing option or portion, that you lose the ability to develop a deep connection with someone in a way that's going to make them want to help you the way you should be helping them. And then it comes back to you. But you got to be willing to make that commitment. And it's not kind of fly by night like we're in the old days where you're networking and the other person tells you what they want from you, and if you can't give it to them, they walk to the next person. It's never a conversation. Those are dictates and demands. Not a productive way to have a conversation.
Yeah, and I think in New York, especially and in the legal world, it's definitely how you monetize everything. I started my career in DC and it was do someone a favor so that they will do a favor for you in the future, And it was always like, I'll help you with a job, but then when you're in that job, I expect you to help me. And it wasn't relationship building and helping out of the kindness of your heart. It was relationship building to, yeah, either get money or with the expectation that they would grant you something that you needed in the future. So starts to feel very transactional.
Yeah, goal-oriented conversations are not the most productive ones.
Yeah, for sure.
But then again, I mean, we're taught lawyers. It's tough. We have younger lawyers there's expectations placed upon them about the number of hours they bill and what they do. Yet we also want them to go out and build business. Mm-hmm. That's kind of counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
You have to get the hours in, but you have to go out and build business. Well, when do I do that?
Yeah.
Like exactly how does that happen? And we teach, You try to train lawyers into how to be that person, but it's really not possible. I mean, in the perfect world, it's not possible to, because the truth is, you get to a certain point in your life and you should spend more time out marketing
Hmm.
than working. But if you're after 30 years, 40 years, you're still the one drafting the papers because you love it, that's fine. If you're drafting the papers because you haven't figured out a model that works better, and you can't build business when you're drafting papers, then you have to think about what it is you're looking to do and how you want to work in the space, how you want to be a lawyer in practice. So you have options, there's always ways to accommodate. I want to work less. So I want to work less. I want to work less and I want to, spend more time with my family, but I don't need the money or I do need the money. I mean, there's so many different criteria that are relevant when we make these kinds of decisions. But my point is, there are decisions to be made. You're not trapped. You're not stuck. You make a decision to go to a firm that has a certain practice area that you never thought you wanted to be in. You go. It turns out you enjoy it. Great. Or it turns out you don't. Well, based on that, you can make your future next decision. There's no reason you can't use it as steps. Just be honest with people about what you're doing. Don't hide the reason or don't not be truthful about the type of work you want to do.
Yeah.
I know it's easy to say now, and I know how hard it is because the stress level of young lawyers starting in law school is something I wasn't expecting. They are literally like tops. They're bound so tight that it feels like they're going to explode. And you feel it. It's just really tense. The environment's really tense. And that's how they're trained. So for 3 years, they were in that environment and they go out and they're not free. They move into a different stressful environment, just as stressful, just different stress. We place these expectations on lawyers. It's a reason why it can not be a gratifying occupation. But my point is you can make it that.
Yeah.
Don't settle, don't accept. Try to figure out a path that will make you happy and yet let you use the skill set that you've built.
And that might not always be, as you said earlier, a practicing attorney. I mean, we've had plenty of guests on who have transitioned to entirely different careers. And I know a lot of attorneys are hesitant to do that because they've invested so many years in law school, taking the bar, getting their years under their belt. And it's the identity thing that you mentioned earlier too. But as we've heard, you're still a lawyer. Let's say you move on to start a business or do real estate or something, you are still an attorney, even if you're not practicing law. So, but like you said, it is easier said than done. And we've definitely talked to a lot of people who it really takes years to kind of either get fed up enough that you don't really care what happens, or just doing a side hustle until it can work out, or just building up the courage. But one way or another, at least some people seem to find their way out.
Yeah, and you just made a great point, side hustle. I mean, there are many different things you can do as a lawyer. There's things that have emerged in the last every year. It seems that we have new things that we can do. Part-time work opportunities, law clerk, online service providers, coverage counsel, or just not be a lawyer in the traditional sense. Be a lawyer, go in-house. I mean, that's something everybody's like, oh yeah, that's the holy grail. But the fact is you take a pay cut, and you may not like where you are. So, I mean, I just feel like part of what will get lawyers into a happier place is being willing to look at other opportunities that are outside the traditional practice that may be closer to something and create an environment closer to something that works for you.
I want to make sure we get into some specifics of your practice, because I know folks will be interested to hear about that. And throughout the conversation, you've mentioned kind of some of the areas of law that are involved under the umbrella of cannabis. So, real estate, IP, negotiating contracts, all of that stuff. But I wanted to get into maybe some of the myth busting, or what your life actually looks like day to day, because the cannabis industry still is new. And so I think a lot of people's exposure, when they think of the average cannabis client or cannabis industry person, they're envisioning like a head shop Bob Marley person in California. Can you talk a little bit about what an actual typical client looks like, and what your day-to-day work looks like, and how that might be different from what people are thinking?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, the funny thing is, first thing that happened when I started to refer to myself as a cannabis lawyer was the people who knew me were like, well, you didn't even smoke a lot of pot. So that's a criteria now for me being a lawyer in the space.
Yeah.
Um, Other people, when this first transition first happened 6 years ago, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, I would say I'm a cannabis lawyer. And we'll get into what the nuances are and specifics, but people would literally take a step back. It's like Voldemort. It was like that's horrible. Like, how could you do that? And I'm like, so you believed, like I did, believed everything we were fed.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm gonna call it the big lie only because that's already a coined phrase that applies or doesn't apply. But the fact is, we were given a lot of misinformation, intentionally deceived or lied to blatantly about the plant. But as fundamentally, being a cannabis lawyer is kind of what you make of it. Yes, you can be a cannabis lawyer and simply do transactions. You set up the structure, you detail the transactions, you close the transaction, and now you put A and B together and they go on their merry way. On the real estate side, part of the component is space is a big deal. Finding a site, securing the site is required in order to get your final license. So the real estate piece, very important. Understanding what information you have to put in a lease, critical. Intellectual property, creativity is king. Trying to figure out legal, compliant ways to protect clients' product, concept, or idea. Fundamentally, it's a mark or a brand. Litigation is litigation, just happens to be in the cannabis space. So it deals with regulation. So the one common thread in all these things are the regulations. So fundamentally, in order to be a cannabis lawyer, you need to fully understand the regulation or the regulatory framework or scheme in the state you're practicing in. But you also need to understand what it means federally, because we live in a world, our republic basically is built on, states' rights overseen by the federal government. And the federal government acts independently of every state. So we have federal illegality. Right now, cannabis is a Schedule I drug, and we can talk about the history and how this came to be and what Controlled Substances Act looked like and why we're in Schedule I. Not important, but we're in one. We shouldn't be, but we are. So it's understanding the federal scheme framework as well as the states and how they interact, because now that we're moving forward where cannabis on the medicinal cannabis was actually rescheduled to Schedule III, we have a new field, a new area of focus. And the other part that I missed, practice area, tax. Tax is perhaps it's the elephant in the room. We live in a world, at least in this country, where it's federally illegal. And because it's federally illegal, a certain Internal Revenue Code provision, 280E, applies. 280E was designed to punish drug dealers. Basically, you're operating illegally. You may or may not go to jail for what you did or do, but you're surely going to be punished and pay taxes. Well, what does that mean? Not just pay taxes on illegal products, but you're going to be prevented from taking certain deductions that are available to everybody else. And it started with a drug cartel. And the nuances, we never really know the true story about how 280 came to be, other than to say the drug cartel figured out, well, we can just declare and pay taxes on the profits. At least we won't go to jail like Al Capone did for tax evasion. And then the Internal Revenue Service and the U.S. government is like, well, you can't do that. And then it turns out they kind of could until 280E. 280E basically says the only thing you get to deduct are your cost of goods sold. That's it. So other businesses get to deduct their rent expense and their employee payroll. We don't get to do that. Every other business gets to deduct all other normal business expenses. We don't pay service providers, your legal fees. Cannabis, we don't get to deduct that. So the tax component is huge, incredibly important. And we're at a crossroads, which is also kind of unique in that the current administration, using a method, basically a single convention order rather than rule-based, they made medicinal cannabis Schedule I to Schedule III. Schedule III, no longer federally legal, no longer have to deal with 280E. So we have, and all these nuances. Well, wait a minute. If they moved medical cannabis to Schedule III, then that's an acknowledgement that there's a legitimate medicinal use for cannabis. And under the law and the Controlled Substances Act, which was passed in 1970, in order to qualify for Schedule 1, you have to meet two criteria. You have to both have no legitimate medicinal use and a high likelihood of abuse. So if you move cannabis from 1 to 3, even if you limit it to medicinal, isn't that an acknowledgement there's a legitimate medicinal use? And if there is, and if that's true, then adult use cannot remain in Schedule 1. Well, we have hearings coming up, administrative law hearings starting on June 29th, and hopefully we're on the path towards moving adult use recreational cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, gets rid of 280E. We have a component piece, which is the Safer Banking Act, which will create a pathway not only for better banking, you still have Bank Secrecy Act and all those things, but you may have lending platforms. Right now, there are none. Right now, landlords are afraid to lease to cannabis because their mortgages, their mortgages are federally insured and have a provision that you can not lease to anybody who is, provide or engage in criminal activity. And cannabis is still Schedule 1 adult use, and hence it's still illegal. So, cannabis is built on a framework of, yes, regulatory heavy and a lot of practice areas, but there's so much more. There's so much more that's intriguing. And for people who are, looking for those kinds of challenges, cannabis provides or presents us lawyers with challenges like no other area. I mean, I'm not even going to talk about the amount of litigation that now comes out of an emerging market and a regulatory scheme. I mean, it's just staggering. Not only the partnership disputes between company owners, members, and shareholders, but fights with the regulators about implementation of the regulations, enforcement of the regulations. So I like to tell, and the reason I started teaching was so that I would give young lawyers, law school students, but soon to be young lawyers, a background in cannabis, which allows them to almost immediately be relevant. Why? The holy grail in as a lawyer is to make partner. The only way you make partner is by being able to generate and build your own client base. Generally speaking, young law students who are graduating at 25 or 26 are really not in a position to build that business because their peers are not in a position to be able to engage them in a way that is a productive relationship. They're not CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. But in cannabis, a 26-year-old can reach out to his peers who are trying to get into the cannabis space. Not that only young people do, but a larger percentage of young people do in a very consolidated market and time. So it does create opportunities. And most firms, not most, many firms, still firms who are adamantly opposed to working in the cannabis space. But we have more firms that are now moving into cannabis every day. So if you go to a firm and you have a cannabis background as a young lawyer, and they want to start a practice area in the firm for cannabis, you all of a sudden raise your level almost immediately. You get tapped to be a guy working, or woman or whoever, to work in that space because you have some knowledge and experience in a very complicated area that they want to get into because there's an opportunity, but nobody else does. So, and I found that to be very true. And I've heard from students that that's given them and created opportunities. So there's a lot of things, a lot of reasons why cannabis is unique. And we also actually just moved into or rebranded our department into the psychedelic space as well, which is a whole nother conversation, and with equally complex regulations, different trajectory, but equally complicated. So.
Deploying new software technology can disrupt familiar workflows and processes, and it often comes with a steep learning curve for the employees in your law firm. We get it, but it doesn't have to be that way. Allrise is a comprehensive law practice management system deeply integrated with the Microsoft tools and technology you're already familiar with, so no steep learning curve is required. And because Allrise is a modular software platform, you can deploy only the specific capabilities you need when you need them. Your choice. If you want to streamline internal operations, boost staff productivity, and deliver superior client service, then take a close look at the AI-powered Allrise platform. It's time to experience software innovation that enables practice excellence. Learn more at allrise.ai.
I hope I'm not wading into the deep end too much, but I'm just so curious. The hearings that you mentioned that are coming up, who is on the other side of transitioning cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3? I mean, is it religious groups? Is it medical groups? I mean, why do you think there has been such a resistance to transition this? I hope I'm not getting into like a super political or
No, no,
controversial topic, but I'm just
no.
curious.
Um, there's so much to unpack in that question. First, historically, cannabis wasn't across the aisle, right? We had support on both sides. Unfortunately, we live in this polarized environment now where everybody seems to have to pick a side. And if one person picks this side, the other person is compelled to pick the other side. Um, but we have proponents of cannabis, GOP proponents. There's GOP legislation right now. The MORE Act is the Democrats' version, and then we have the GOP version. And there's a lot of overlap and similarities. Some subtle differences, mainly around, expungement of records and decriminalizing. But without getting too much into that, like it's always crossed the aisle. My fear has always been that we're going to make it political. It's hard enough without it being made political. So to make it political would be a tragedy. But the reason people take the position, I mean, we go back historically, there were religious uses of cannabis, and the AMA was one of the biggest proponents. We saw a shift in the perception of the government about cannabis, basically when people started to use it for recreational purposes, which ironically came when the Mexican Americans moved from Mexico to the US to work here, and they brought cannabis with them. Acapulco Gold is a real thing. And it scared people. And then we saw a change in a transition where slowly, and then we had, I mean, there was literally one person in the government, Harry Anslinger, that is almost single-handedly responsible for a lot of the information that was disseminated and a lot of the current viewpoints by religious organizations. Because guess what they did? Remember, in those days, the federal government could enact federal legislation, but they couldn't impose that on the states. So they would enact federal legislation and they would try to figure out a way to get the states to enact smaller versions. And guess what they did? They went fundamentally to women's groups and religious organizations, and they used them to promote and stand on the soapbox and promote the dangers of cannabis, to develop this public perception of an evil, dangerous drug. It's a plant with amazing things that can come from it. And we already know that. The problem is we've never been able to research it. And without getting into the long torrid tale, I will say historically there have been studies done, big studies with hundreds of thousands of people and doctors and hospitals. In fact, Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, three-term mayor of New York City, Italian-American, beloved, despite the fact that this was during World War II. And remember, Italy wasn't always on the right side. He developed what's called the LaGuardia Committee Report. Came out in 1944. He spent 4 or 5 years building it. Commissioned Bellevue Hospital, doctors, nurses, and patients, and did a study. Hundreds of pages. Found 5-year study. Found no causal link to crime. So debunked the criminality theory. Right? Cannabis use not a factor in determining. Not a determining factor in major crimes or juvenile delinquency. No, not physically addictive. Surprise, surprise. Do you know that? It's not physically addictive. Some emotional addictiveness. Now, the other thing is like, why is it not addictive? It's a plant. Well, so is tobacco. Well, guess what? Tobacco companies are allowed to add nicotine to tobacco. Nicotine is the most addictive chemical that we know. Who knew? User demographics. Researchers found that use was heavily centered in Manhattan, basically Harlem, among Black and Latino communities. Now, why is that relevant? Because ultimately, it was used to control those communities. And Nixon didn't hide it. Well, he tried. But the Nixon tapes showed the conversations he had. in the Oval Office, and there was no doubt that's exactly what he did and why he did it. And psychological effects. Symptoms were generally mild, primarily involving floating cessation, hunger, and feeling of adequacy. That's what you get. We're not going to talk about what happens when you drink alcohol, right? I mean, So, we had this information. We had it again in the Schaefer report. Ironically, Nixon, who was, if you read, I just tell people, form your own opinion, read the reports, they're online. Hundreds of pages of his transcripts of the tapes that he made of everybody who he came into his office. Why? Because he wanted to control them. He didn't want to, it wasn't about creating history and a reciprocal or receptacle of assets where we can go back and listen to them. He did it so he can say, remember you were here and you said this? Well, this is what I want from you. So he taped everything. 1970 Controlled Substances Act. I won't tell you how it came to be, but it wasn't supposed to have cannabis as a permanently Schedule I member. Then legislator, now fast forward, Mayor Koch, actually got specific language on the record saying it was going to be in Schedule I temporarily until they can do the research to find the right schedule. And guess what happened the day after they passed the Controlled Substances Act? They actively prevented anybody from researching cannabis. Shocking. So, why are we here where we here? Why do we have the groups opposing legalization? Because they still believe things that they were told without any legal support. I mean, there are like aberrant journals and articles and studies that come back and say, no, it's terrible and there's all these bad things. And I've had people give them to me, say, well, what about this? And then I read where they come from. They're supported by, coalition against cannabis, but deep, like it's not obvious. You have to research who's that and who's that and who's that. So yeah, no, I have these conversations all the time. Some of the things I listen to and hear are staggering. I mean, go to community board meetings, which is part of the process to legal, to get a site and get a final license. And I hear community members talk about gateway 10, 15, 30, 50, 100 times. Hundreds of times. We're past that. We know it's not a gateway. In fact, we debunked the gateway theory. Using cannabis does not lead you to use harder drugs. Doesn't. Guess what does? Alcohol. So, yeah, I mean, it's not surprising. Ironically, the way the structure of the hearings are the only people who get to attend and state their position at the hearings are the other side, not the proponents of the bill or the legislation or the rule or the order in this case, but those opposed. So everybody came out when they published the list of those who were given the opportunity to attend the hearings. Everybody's an anti-cannabis group or person. That's really fundamentally because the structure of this hearing, when you go to, when you promulgate an order and then you have this, it's because the only people who get to speak are the people who are against it, not the people who are for it. So I don't give much weight to that, but it does cause people some consternation. Like, wait a minute, so nobody's going to be speaking in support and we're going to rely on the government? That's who's going to speak we're not good with that. It's what we got to live with. And hopefully, I mean, I do believe that ultimately we'll get there. I just don't know how long it's going to take.
And that was going to be my exact next question. The next logical question is, do you think it's going to happen? I mean, if we have you back at this time next year, do you think that is enough reasonable time for this to happen? Or could you easily see it going another 5 years before it happens?
So I think that we'll be there on a certain level. Here's what we don't know. Let's assume for a second that it does, we don't lose that. And ultimately they decide that adult use recreational cannabis should not be in Schedule I. They can move it to Schedule II, which still is federally legal. They can move it to Schedule III, which is where they move medicinal, which is where controlled substances are that have a legitimate use as they define it. The only psychedelic-like substance we have in Schedule III right now is ketamine. And 4 or 5, Tylenol with codeine, things like that. It could be descheduled. Tobacco and alcohol, no regulatory oversight. They're descheduled. They're not scheduled anything. They should be, if anything should be. So depending upon where it ends up, and what the decision of the administrative law judge looks like, that will in large part determine next steps. The fact is, right now, the medicinal operators have to register with the FDA. That's what happens when you are now a legal Schedule III substance, and you can operate legally in society. Although if you look at the application, some of the questions are kind of concerning. So it really will depend. I believe we will be on our way to adult use legalization. I think the one part that we don't know, we don't know what it's going to look like. For example, if it's descheduled, then it's treated like, tobacco and alcohol, and then we have tobacco, alcohol, and firearms oversight. If it's Schedule III, we have the FDA oversight. If it's Schedule 4 or 5, we have FDA, but much less. If it's 2, it's still federally illegal, does nothing for us. So then it's really hard to say what happens and how long it will take, because until we know where it ends up, we don't know what happens next. And by the way, I'm not sure that anybody knows. I'm not sure they've done an analysis and say, well, we're going to regulate this, because the fear is, well, they're going to regulate it like another drug. Well, that wouldn't be good, because then pharmacies and big medical operators will be the only place you can get cannabis. And then all these small operators are out of business. Kind of like what they're doing to hemp now. I know beyond the scope, but they may end a market they created as recently as 2018 that's tens of billions of dollars invested, and it may be over in a minute. A whole other issue. Hemp is a sister plant to cannabis, just so everybody knows, much more robust, much sturdier, and with a bunch of legitimate agricultural uses, which is why we've embraced hemp and not cannabis in the same way. Hemp, guess what it could make? It can make sails and rope. And what did we need in the 16 and 1700s? Rope and sails. So 1800s too, even early 1900s. So yeah, I mean, let's same time next year, and then we'll have another conversation.
Yeah, that sounds good. I want to end on one kind of more broad sort of crystal ball question. We usually like to get predictions from guests. So I mean, if aside from the Schedule 3, Schedule 1 question that's kind of specific, but just in general, if we were going to have this conversation again in 5 years, what's kind of your prediction on what the industry looks like? Is it tons of law firms have cannabis practices, and we have, as a population, a lot more people gravitating to cannabis over alcohol, or have we made marginal progress, or is it possible that we get a new administration and we, take things backward? What's kind of your crystal ball for 5 years down the road?
Yeah. Well, I don't think we're going to take steps backwards. As far as big firms, there are some big firms in the space. I mean, Denton's is in the space. Mainly what we have, the talent we have, are the smaller firms, which are still medium-sized by anybody's definition, who have a more focused cannabis practice. They're comfortable with it. They do all work in it. They represent some of the higher end operators, MSOs, multi-state operators in the space. So we have that. What I think is going to look different, and I talk about it all the time to anybody who listens, is I think as the market emerges, I think we're going to start to see things that I don't think anybody's really prepared or talking about. Right now, we're seeing a huge decline in the younger population's use of alcohol, and older, for different reasons. Younger, more health focused. They don't want to use that because they know it's poison. Older, because our bodies can't process it anymore. So the infused beverage market is probably going to be a huge part of the cannabis market. One, because existing users want another alternative way to ingest cannabis, and because people who don't use cannabis do not want to smoke something. They don't want to vape. And edibles have limited social value. Beverage is what we're comfortable with. We've been drinking beverage since baptisms and bar mitzvahs, every wedding, every holiday. Every single holiday, every single event forever is around drinking. So if you want to talk about increasing potential opportunities and use, giving people a comfortable way to move into this space and experience it because they don't want to use alcohol, it's beverage. So I do think that we're going to see on-site consumption lounges, which I don't believe are going to be focused on smoking, but I think are going to be more like bars and clubs that serve infused drinks. Cocktails, mocktails are now infused beverage. Draft beer can be infused. Wine can be infused. So we can have a very diverse beverage market where we don't force people who don't want to drink alcohol to make a choice. Either I have something that's non-alcoholic or I have alcohol because I can only get that in a bar. Now I can go to a consumption lounge and I can have a variety of different types of infused beverage of my choice. The big question is this, not whether we're going to have on-site consumption and increase an enormous different number of different beverage brands, but when are we going to combine the two? Why is it that every state, every regulator, for some reason thinks you cannot put cannabis and alcohol together? And there's a variety of different arguments they've made. None of them, in my mind, are legitimate. One, they're both depressants. Who knows what'll happen? Well, guess what? We've been combining alcohol and cannabis together in the same room or made the same building or same slot for like hundreds of years. I was a rugby player. In the days before dry campuses, you'd go and have a drink up, and then you'd walk in the back and you'd smoke, and you'd come back out and you'd drink, and you'd walk in the back and you smoke. It's the way it was. But right now, the last thing we're going to see combined are going to be alcohol and cannabis in the same building. The only place it exists is in Minnesota, and they passed legislation allowing hemp-derived infused beverages to be served in bars, max 5 milligrams. But if you listen to the hearing, it was GOP controlled, you'll realize they did it by accident. And I laugh every time I listen to it because the GOP leader turned to Sergeant in Arms or whoever it is and said, "Did we just legalize cannabis?" Like really surprised. And all you hear is laughter in the background. So they did it. It could be done. It should be done. It can do it now. We have beverage enhancers. I can walk into a bar, I can get a club soda, and I can infuse it myself. 15, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, kind of the way alcohol hits. I can feel whatever I feel based on the amount that I choose to put into my drink. So these are going to be interesting things that are happening, and they're going to give people more options and more choices. We fundamentally want to move away from alcohol. We still want something that's going to relieve social anxiety and give us an opportunity to engage with other people. I'm not telling people or proselytizing that you should be using anything that is psychoactive. Yeah. But at the same time, people are still going to look for that. And the question is where they're going to get it and how are they going to get it? So, yeah, I think that's going to be big changes moving forward.
Okay. Well, I feel like we could talk for another hour. There's so many different kind of subtopics in this conversation, but we'll have to have you back to
Sure.
kind of further explore some of these. And who knows, maybe next time we talk to you, things will be totally different. We'll be in a different schedule, and the FDA will be on their way to regulating. Who knows?
Yeah. What does they say? From your mouth to God's ears? I think that's a pretty safe bet. I think that's a pretty safe bet. And by the way, if anybody ever wants to connect with me, I'm happy to share. I'm happy to talk. I'm happy to have conversations. I'm happy to have coffee. So just to put that out there for you, I enjoy that. And I enjoy the conversation. The problem is we live in a society where no one wants to talk about facts. They just want to tell you the conclusion, and they yell it until you believe it or until you agree with them. Having the dialogue is the only way we're ultimately going to normalize the plant. And having conversations with kids the way we have conversations with kids about tobacco and alcohol, we have to get to the point where we can have those conversations about cannabis. But somehow cannabis is demonized, and it's not a subject people are comfortable talking about. So I don't proselytize, but I think we need to talk about things. The fact is we can go to an arena or a stadium and now see alcohol ads, minimally tobacco, but plenty of gambling. So we're okay showing 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old kids gambling ads where they can get on their phone and they can gamble on the game they're watching. But God forbid we say cannabis out loud, we're going to be struck down by lightning.
Yep.
We got a long way to go still.
I think the gambling piece might speak to the success of those lobbying organizations that represent.
Shocking.
But I don't want to get into a whole nother whole nother subject. But anyways, in closing, you offered to connect with people. What is the best way for people to find you, follow you, learn more about what you do?
Probably LinkedIn and a message. I respond to them all. I think it's just it creates a network immediately. So people who want to move in, connect with me, they can connect to other people like-minded or other people they want to connect to and learn from, see what they post. I mean, a lot of us try to post relevant things, information, events, facts. So I think that's probably the most productive way. It's the only social that I'm really using for the professional purposes. Although on the stores, Instagram is still king. So.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
sounds good. Well, thank you, Andrew, so much for
Sure.
being here and for
Thank you,
taking
Lauren.
through all that. Take care.
Pleasure. Bye now.
Thanks for listening, and join us again for another Rule of Law podcast from All Rise.